Hey friend, a few weeks back I did a video all about my eng handoff process, so how I actually pass my final designs on to my engineers. In this video, I want to talk more about the QA implementation part of the process. So this is in relation to when the engineers are actually working on implementing my designs. There's times when they'll send me their work in progress and I'll give them some feedback as to how it's going. And we call this the QA process. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about how I've been doing that in some of my projects. Now, before I show you my process, I want to caveat that it is not perfect. In fact, we've been changing it a lot over time and improving our workflow and our relationship with our engineers. But this is how we handed off the work for my most recent project. And from this, we're going to be making some changes, which I'll talk about as I show you this as well. I think one of the key things to point out here is that you should be doing QA as the engineers are working on the design. You don't want to sort of wait till the end when they sort of say, yep, we're done, we've finished everything, everything's coded and it's ready to go live, to suddenly find out that some things were not implemented correctly, or maybe there's just some tweaks or some, quick wins and things you can do to improve it and make sure that it fits the design specs that you gave them. So this should really be something that you're doing over time as they're building and implementing your work. Now, how we do it is we have weekly demos. So every Friday afternoon, we have a 30-minute session with the engineers, and they kind of demo and show us the progress and the work that they've done that week. And as they're showing us this work, we're kind of keeping in mind as designers, like, okay, that doesn't look quite right, or sort of asking questions or trying to clarify, what they're actually showing us. And often they will give us access to like the demo environment where we can then log in and sort of take our own screenshots. And then that's when the kind of like documentation process starts, where we take those screenshots and actually put them side by side with the final designs and kind of highlight and point out areas that we think could be improved or aren't quite up to scratch with the design. I really recommend having this weekly demo that's recurring with your engineers while they're building out the work. It's a really great way for not only them to kind of show you the progress and what they've been working on, but also for you to kind of see the live progress of where they're up to. And then it also kind of allows the engineers to speak to the work that they've been doing. So this is where we kind of ended in my handoff video, where I showed you what the handoff looks like in Figma to our engineers. Now, when it comes to actually QA, we have a whole nother page in our Figma file just for Eng QA feedback. So once we've done the demo and like we go into the live environment, we then take screenshots. And this is kind of laid out in phases here. So as I mentioned, you shouldn't be waiting until the very end when they're all done. So this, like each of these blocks kind of almost represents a week. And so every week we've like gone in, done the demo, taken some screenshots, given some feedback, and then the next week kind of come back and kind of done the same thing again. So I'm just going to zoom into like one of these areas, which is reporting and campaign management, which you might remember from my handoff video that I did earlier. So just to show you what this kind of actually looks like. So here on the left-hand side is the final design, and here on the right-hand side is a screenshot that I had taken from the demo staging environment. And you can already see, at least I can already see some differences here in the design. And what I've done is I've kind of pulled out any like text styling that is not quite up to scratch with the design. So in this case, calling out that this heading isn't quite right and it should be this text styling. Similar for some of the other areas. In this case, I'm calling out that the color of this text isn't quite right. You can see here it's like more of a gray, and then in the demo they had like more of a black color. So kind of just calling out some of those things. Then over to the right, I actually leave like really kind of detailed notes, or I guess action items for our engineers. And this is separated both into design feedback and content feedback. And as the engineers go through and complete these, they let us know when it's done, and then we'll come in and check. And then I kind of like mark it as done by strike throughing and whatever. These pink labels are things that I added on those dates. So like in early May, I had a question about tooltips. So we kind of had this as like a running list for this screen, and like just kept it up to date and kept updating it as new things arised or as engineers are actually fixing things. Now, in some cases, I do give the engineers a little bit more context if needed, and I kind of do that through Figma comments. So here I'm kind of giving the engineers a little bit of like, oh, why don't you check what this engineer is doing? Like he has the right button and it looks like a little bit different. So kind of like trying to nudge them to guide them to like where and how they can actually fix or resolve the issue. So then I kind of repeated this for each screen, or I guess even each state of the screen. So here, like you can see the design, what the drop down is, and then here you can see the build, what the drop down is, which is a very different component. And that's just kind of repeated throughout each of the screen states here, kind of having like the design on the left and then the screenshot or the latest screenshot on the right. And in some cases, like really like using the pink to highlight areas that need a little bit more attention. In this case, this button could really do with some padding, love. So as I mentioned, we didn't quite like follow all the way through with this process. You can see here that it's like not all crossed off. And the reason is because we found that it was actually getting really difficult for the engineers to keep up with the feedback we were putting in here. They weren't really coming back and closing the loop on what had been done. So then it was up to design to kind of like spot the difference to see what changes had been made. And this just wasn't working very efficiently or effectively for us. So since then we've moved this to Jira, which is what we kind of use for like our internal eng ticketing system. I guess as design, we don't really use it very much, but the engineers use it a lot to kind of keep track of their work and like have tickets for different tasks. So I'm not going to show it to you just for confidentiality reasons, but you can imagine it looks like pretty much the same. So now what we do is we create a Jira ticket for each screen, and then we have like an upload of the final design for that screen, and then we also like upload images with like annotations just like we have here of the demo environment. And then we kind of attach to the ticket like the things that we think, you know, need updating, pretty much essentially like this list that I showed you here, that then is now in the Jira ticket. And then we can like leave comments on that ticket, and like the engineers will update like individually the tasks of these that have been done. And it just kind of became a bit more of a like scalable, transparent way to keep up to date and to keep it more relevant. So because the engineers are already working in Jira, for them to have to come into Figma and kind of do this QA stuff just wasn't really part of their workflow. So we've kind of adapted to their workflow of doing it in Jira. And the great thing about doing it in Jira actually is that they can mark it as done. So it's a lot easier to kind of know, okay, this has been done, it's completed, like it's getting moved off the board, or it's like going somewhere else, wherever it goes in the land of Jira. And it was just easier to keep track of and easier for engineers to also like scope, making time to actually like have time to work on these QA fixes and feedback. So in general, it's made the process a little bit more transparent. And that is really it. I think kind of the key things about a QA process is, one, I mentioned you should be meeting like ideally weekly to have demos and kind of see like what progress has been made by the engineers. Second, like you should make sure that you have access to a live demo or sort of staging environment so you can actually go and log in and see the changes that the engineers are making. That's really, really helpful. And then 3, like what is your process for communicating with engineers changes that need to be made? Whether you do it in Figma like this, or maybe you do it with comments in Figma. I know some other designers use InVision to do this feedback, or like Docs. I've done this in Google Docs once before. That didn't work out very well. But whatever that kind of process is, just make sure that the engineers are going to use that process. That's what I found didn't really work well with Figma, as the engineers weren't really using it as much as design was. So Jira for us has kind of been a happy like meeting place or middle ground where I don't mind as a designer logging in there and creating new tasks for engineers related to QA, and for them like it's already part of their workflow and they're seeing it every day anyway, so there's like less chance that they'll miss it or it'll get lost or won't get updated. One other last thing that I want to mention here, in case you didn't notice it, is that we also include content feedback. To us, content and copywriting is just as important as the designs itself. I have been in projects where content doesn't get as well considered as design when it comes to QA and implementation. So I really try to push for content and double check that the engineers are putting in the right strings. That's very important. All of our copy gets translated into a lot of different languages, so it's really important to have the correct copy in there. So if there's a way for you to work with your UX writer, or if you're doing the content yourself, like make that part of the QA process as well, so that content also gets considered and it's not just about the design. Hope that was helpful for you to see. As I mentioned, this is not a perfect process and it is evolving over time as we find better and more efficient ways to do this. But I'm curious to hear how you do it at your company. Do you do it all in Figma, InVision? Do you use another design tool? Do you do it over Slack? Do you document it somewhere else? I find that there's not quite yet really a perfect way to do this. So really curious what's worked at your company. Let me know in the comments below. Lastly, if you're super interested in this topic and want to talk more about design and handoff and implementation and QA and all that cool stuff, you can always book time with me on Superpeer. I do 30-minute one-on-one mentoring sessions there. Thanks friend for tuning in. I'll catch you in a future video. Bye-bye.